Hello, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the February meeting of the BET. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. There is one routine. The first item on our agenda is request for a budget adjustment. There's one routine item detailed on the meeting agenda. Ms. Crumick, BET Clerk, can you please move this item?
Yes, I'd like to move SE2 from the First Selectman, $2,870 for the approval to use a contribution to Channel 79.
Second.
Okay, that item has been moved by Ms. Crumick and seconded by Mr. Raymer. Ms. Moriarty, can you please give the Budget Committee report?
Yes, we took up item SE2 for $2,870. This is a grant from the Area 9 Cable Council. The plan is to use the funds to replace the monitor in the lobby of Town Hall. The new monitor is expected to improve the clarity and resolution. The old screen will be reused at another location. The Budget Committee voted 4-0-0 to approve the use of the grant funds.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, can everyone please say aye and raise their hands? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. There's also one budget adjustment request that I've designated as non-routine. NW3 Nathaniel Witherall, an additional appropriation for domestic hot water system replacement in the amount of $255,000. Can someone move that item, please?
Moved.
That item has been moved by Ms. Moriarty and seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Moriarty, please give the Budget Committee report.
Yes, this additional appropriation for Nathaniel Witherall for $255,000 was heard at the Budget Committee last week. The funds are to be used to replace a malfunctioning hot water system. The project was also submitted to the BET as part of the proposed fiscal 20 capital budget. However, Nathaniel Witherall Management is concerned about the possible failure of the system before the new appropriation would be available, so is requesting this item be considered as an interim to allow them to move forward much more quickly. The system itself is only 5 years old and was installed as part of Project Renew. However, there were problems with the system from the beginning. Equipment has already been replaced 2 times. The Budget Committee was told that the recommended design with Project Renew was poor and the system was oversized from the start, causing problems. The Budget Committee asked Nathaniel Witherall Management if there was recourse to either the manufacturer or the design engineer if there were problems from the start. I know that Ms. Tarkington had asked for an engineering report confirming the design of the replacement system. However, the Budget Committee in its deliberations, given the concern about maintaining hot water in the facility, we voted 3-1-0. Ms. Tarkington voted against to approve this request.
We're joined here tonight by Alan Brown, Administrator for Nathaniel Witherall. Alan, would you like to join us and talk a little bit about this request?
Here, see if it's on.
Yeah, thanks. I'm the administrator at Nathaniel Witherall, and Leslie did a pretty good job of summarizing the nature of the problem, but let me go into a little bit deeper history and a more complete summary of what's going on. We have a hot water boiler system that was installed as Project Renew, as part of Project Renew back in 2014, and almost immediately on the utilization of the system, we started to have problems with the heat exchangers and the boilers themselves related to corrosion. When we addressed the problem to the manufacturer, their response initially was that it was a problem related to hard water that was delivered to us by Aquarian. So we hired a consultant to go and look into that a little bit further, and it turned out that that was an inaccurate. It was an inaccurate postulate of what the problem was caused by. The hard water, the system was the Aquarian's water was fine, and according to the specifications that were necessary to run these systems without issue. Ultimately, because of the corrosion issues, all 14 of the boilers were changed as part of the warranty by the manufacturer. Despite that, within a year later, all 14 of the boilers and the heat exchangers had to be replaced again for the same reasons. Corrosion, failure of the igniters, and other problems related to the operation that, from our perspective, were related to poor design. We subsequently approached the manufacturer, and despite the fact that more than a year had passed, during which time the system would have been still under warranty, the manufacturer agreed to replace the boilers again. So as of tonight's meeting, we're on the second round of boilers, and those two have failed. Now, the boiler system is designed, there are 14 boilers, and the design calls for 6 of them to provide hot water to the kitchen and to the laundry, and that system functions at higher temperatures than the domestic hot water, where 8 of the boilers are designed to provide domestic water for bathing, washing, and other uses that we would use all in our homes. So the residents who require hot water are provided that water through the 8 that are designed for the domestic water system. Currently, of the 14 boilers, only 4 are working, 1 for the kitchen, and the other 3 for the domestic system. And because of the ongoing problems, our board, which has tracked this problem from the time that it began, became alarmed that if the system failed completely and we weren't able to provide hot water within the building, that we might have to evacuate or shut down the operation of the building for failure of our boilers to be able to provide water. I do have some people here with me tonight. There's a half a dozen of us. Jack Hornack is our Director of Facilities. He can provide some technical information beyond my skill level. We have Glenn Sigliger here, who is our Foreman of Maintenance, who has often been called to try and get these boilers working again. We have Kevin Brown from Hunter Mechanical, which is the contractor that we've used for repairs. He can add insights perhaps beyond what Jack or Glenn can about how the system is functioning. And Tom Ellis is our Director of Finance, who can talk about the numbers. But as it stands right now, we and our board feel that there is a risk of being unable to supply hot water in the building. And even though we planned on replacing the system in fiscal 2000, which would be this coming July, we feel there's a risk in not proceeding more quickly, and that's why we've asked for your approval to proceed with the $255,000 expenditure this year.
A Department of Health concern for the hot water? Is your concern more with the kitchen, or is it more with the domestic hot water?
Well,
The failure issue? I mean, which would trigger, would each individually trigger an evacuation, or?
The kitchen might or might not, but if we were unable to provide hot water to the residents, that would be a health department issue.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, this item's been moved and seconded. Thank you, Alan, for the description. I'd like to open it up for questions from the members. Mr. Mason.
Good evening. Welcome. This has been about a 5, 6, 7-year period of replacing boilers. These boilers, as I would understand it, usually have a life of around 30 years. So there's something, as you indicate to us, the cycling causing a problem. So, although I don't want to see Nathaniel Witherell run out of heat, I don't want to see that situation happen, I understand that. But my concern is, are we replacing boilers that we're going to see you again in 2 or 3 years? What are we doing on the engineering or the redesign side so we fix this problem and it doesn't happen again? Because it's repetitive at this point, and it has to be something that has to be changed.
Right. I only sent the design of the new system to Jill this afternoon, but we have had our architect provide a design, and based on recommendations from Hunter Mechanical, we've identified a different manufacturer with a boiler system that functions differently than the current system. Jack, why don't you take a shot at this?
Evening. To answer your question, Leslie, what type of design are we going to put in? Well, I contacted Pistol and Associates, who is the town-approved architect, and I asked them what design they felt would best suit Nathaniel Witherell. I also asked Hunter Mechanical, who again is a town-approved mechanical engineer for the town, as to what design and what boiler manufacturer they felt is the best for Witherell. Pistol and Associates did a blueprint drawing of the design, the layout, the demolition, and the installation of Lochinvar boilers, which again they recommend for Witherell, as does Hunter Mechanical. Lochinvar boilers are a German boiler. They're the benchmark of boilers. They have a 10 to 15-year lifespan. They're easy to replace. They're easy to work on, and they're reliable. The boilers that we currently have, Armstrong boilers, the manufacturer has discontinued making those boilers. So we wanted to go with the best available, specified by the town architects and the town mechanical engineers, Hunter Mechanical. So that's the direction that we're looking to go in.
Mr. Drake.
The 14 boilers were over-designed with basically a twice water delivery ability than should have been. That's a fault of the engineering firm that was designing for Project Renew. And that was a fault because those boilers are not designed to cycle on and off, which they were, causing premature heat exchanger failures. So with the actual need of the number and the capacity of boilers, both for the domestic hot water and the kitchen, we need 4 boilers for the domestic hot water. 3 will provide hot water. The 4th will be a redundancy factor, which is critical. And the same thing goes for the kitchen and laundry. 2 will provide. The 3rd will be a redundancy factor. They'll all be designed into our building management system, so they will all cycle on as needed and have constant run hours on all.
Ms. Tarkington.
Again, it is not? Is it on? Yeah, okay. My question really related to really two-sided engineering kind of specifications. One had to do with a review of the current system so that the town could possibly have the opportunity either to go further on the warranty. Sometimes there's, mechanical contractors' warranties, and that has a finite life. And then, in addition, there is an equipment warranty, such as a roof warranty might extend longer than the roofer's warranty, et cetera. So, even in my simple internet, review of this, this Armstrong Flow Echo says it has a 5-year guarantee, and yet it's only just over 4 years since the system was installed. So my point on the engineering drawings was, in review of it, was to make sure we had the pictures, everything that we might need to take any kind of legal review or anything else that the town might want to do to proceed and get some of this $250,000 repaid through another resource. So I do think that that's important, as well as then also to have the drawings, which, architectural, whatever, but I was thinking more mechanical engineering, because it's my understanding this type of system was put in before because of the space requirements at Witherall and, with the new designs for Witherall and the 3 different buildings and so forth, this was a system that worked. So, again, to elaborate a little bit in what I was suggesting was really that. And then finally, I would just sort of, I've got 2 more points. One, your information that you gave us the other day, which I didn't have a chance to read in the session, said that the gallon capacity of the new system is 90 versus the gallon capacity of 50, so it's almost double that capacity, so maybe you could explain that. And then finally, I had one more question, but why don't we go with this for now?
Leslie, you're absolutely right. As far as any recourse we have on the boilers that are there, we have pictures plenty, we have tech advice plenty, as well as the architects, Pistol and Associates, because they've been down to see the boilers. And I think that we can, in fact, pursue the engineering team that originally designed it, further pursue Armstrong boilers, and take that whichever way our legal department here at the town so chooses to go. And that's a good point. And I think once we get, hopefully, this approved, then we can venture into that and see how far we can get along with that.
Right, and then I just, another point here was, I remembered my last point, was that when you visited with us last week, I asked the question about insurance and failure, and I think Alan said that there wasn't failure at that point in time, but now we've learned that we're down to 4 boilers, so now we are talking about failure. So I didn't know if this is an appropriate time to notify Megan Damaco and our risk insurance area to see if there's any opportunity on that front. Again, building up different way. I'm sorry? Building up a way, there's debris or failure, whatever. So, again, to address this issue.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's a direction we can most definitely go in, Leslie. Absolutely. To answer your other question about the number of gallons, the original boilers, the 8 for domestic hot water, had a hourly demand of 2320, an overestimate of 1160 gallons per hour. That's why we're dropping it down from 8 boilers to 4. And the same thing is with the boilers for the kitchen and laundry. The 6 boilers had a gallon per hour delivery rate of 1740 and overestimate of 870 gallons per hour. So with the new boiler design, and again, spec'd out Pistola and Associates, who took all that into consideration, have designed these boilers with a greater water holding capability, allowing us to use 3 all the time and 1 for a redundancy factor.
Thank you, Jack.
Ms. Crumick.
I'd like to ask Glenn, as the foreman, if you wouldn't mind commenting on how often are you down there working on these right now? And what is your concern as someone who's actually responsible for keeping them going until we find a resolution?
We're consistently, we're consistently having to deal with the water heaters tripping out all the time, which means they go off. And that's when when it's over my head, I call in Kevin, and we've had to consistently repair these. And being down to one on the kitchen side is unnerving. I've gotten calls in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. They have no hot water, and I have to go in and do what I can to keep these going. Welcome.
I also wanted to ask Kevin Brown if he could just comment, since he seems to be the person with the knowledge on the mechanical side. What's your view of where we are right now and why we need this sooner rather than later?
Well, of the, like,
Put it up.
sorry, well, like Jack was saying, of the 14 units, you only have 4 running. So 10 of them, the heat exchangers have failed. They've looked into cost replacement of the heat exchangers for the existing units, and it's almost the price of a new heater. In order to try to repair those, I couldn't even give them an estimate on what it would cost, because they would have to be air tested, checked for leaks, and find out where the heat exchanger portion has failed. So it's not cost effective, in my opinion, to do that. And once again, with the rate of the failure of the existing ones, with only 4 remaining, they can't tell how long it's going to be able to maintain the facility with hot water. So I believe that's why they're coming forward now to ask for funds to replace the units themselves.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Raymer.
So for me, it's perfectly clear that I would support this appropriation. What concerns me is that I need it not to be that we write you a check for $255,000. Now your problem is solved and nothing happens by way of our getting satisfaction from the source of our problem. It's $255,000 worth of taxpayers' money, and we need not to take that lightly. There's a statute of limitations on claims. The statute of limitations on some of your claims have already run. But you have a 6-year statute of limitations on contract claims. That's the last of the limitations that are still out there. You let that go by, and there's no recourse whatsoever. So I need you to be careful that you deal directly with the town attorney to be sure that they have the appropriate information and that we act seasonably. I need you also to be careful not to toss out in the demolition process the physical components that will be part of the evidence with it, because you will be surprised, you'll be not surprised to discover that Armstrong and others will bring a robust defense in which they are suggesting that there are no difficulties. None of this dialogue that I'm having with you has anything to do with whether or not I'm voting in favor of the appropriation. I am. But I need not to leave here and then have the problem die, leaving the taxpayers out the $255,000. That would be a tragedy.
Ms. Vasiliotis.
I know, it takes a little bit. With the new system, what's to guarantee that this corrosion is not going to happen again?
That's a good question, because that's one of the key factors that we don't want to run into again. I have pictures, but I can explain it just as easy. The current boilers are a cast iron steel design with a plastic sleeve insert and a heat exchanger that goes inside that. When either the heat exchanger or the plastic insert leaks, it leaks onto the rustable steel of the boiler itself, causing the problems. That's something I definitely do not want to run into again. So in speccing out the Lochinvar boilers, the best friend of a boiler is stainless steel. It won't rust, it won't corrode, There's no plastic inserts. The heat exchangers are designed correctly. Thus, the Lochinvar boilers will be installed.
Mr. Weisbrod.
You may have mentioned it already, so the warranty that new manufacturers present would be what quality and what duration?
You know, that's a good question. Generally, I haven't looked into that exactly. I know that a life expectancy on these boilers is 10 to 15 years. The warranty will be looked at again once the boilers are installed, and we'll work with that warranty.
On the internet.
I'll start from the second question first. These new boilers are, compared to what we have, virtually maintenance-free, although they are on a preventive maintenance schedule. It's a computerized system that we have at Witherell that we will abide by the maintenance requirements for the Lochinvar boilers. That will not be an issue. The issues with the other boilers, from day one, when the switch was thrown to start them up, there were problems, immediate problems. And the engineering team for Project Renew was constantly trying to figure out why these boilers were failing, why they were short-circuiting. How come? What's the problem? And it was not till about a year after the install till we finally realized that it was an over-design of boilers causing them to short cycle, causing the internals to fail. And once we realized that and we were able to shut down boilers and keep 2 or 3 or 4 running, it was better. But the other bad part of the design of the Armstrong boilers is that once they're hooked up in series like they are, they all have to run. They have to run. And they would start up, shut down, start up, shut down, causing the problems that we currently have.
Mr. Deuce.
Jack, how long would it take to have this new system, have the old system demoed and have the new system installed? Are months, I presume?
The new boilers have a 10-day lead time, so I can get those fairly quickly. And in order to do this install, it's not just a complete tear out and a complete install. It has to be done in phases so that the facility constantly has water.
Okay.
And once we pull out a certain number of boilers, while others run, then we'll install a new boiler. Get that up and running, tear out more, put the new boiler in, and we can phase it into the facility. Time frame, you could probably get the first boiler in on each side of the water system within a week after they were in-house, and the total install time is probably going to be 4 weeks to 5 weeks, and I tend to be a little, it'll probably be longer.
But they come from Germany, correct? And are they coming from off the shelf, or are they fabricated for?
They're here from a manufacturer, Swan, and we can pick them up, like I said, with a 10-day lead time.
Okay, and if by chance something causes your 4 existing boilers to fail, and you mentioned earlier, I think, that you have to close the facility potentially, but is there no way to get a backup source of hot water temporarily?
That's another good question, Andy. Andy, you can do that with electricity by bringing in a generator. You can do that with an HVAC system that cools with a moving, cool, portable air conditioning unit. With water, you cannot bring a spare boiler and hook it up to provide water for you. That's why I felt that we can't wait until the 2020 budget, and I'm in front of you right now asking to do it as fast as we can.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, Jack. Could you please just, after the meeting or, in the next few days at your convenience, email back to Roland, who will circulate to us the warranty, which, on the internet for the Armstrong said it was 5 years, and the warranty for the Lochinvar, which it says on the internet is 3 years, just so that we would have that kind of information as follow-up. I just, like to follow up a little bit on what Andy said, too, because, again, I don't know what the value of the equipment is relative to the installation costs on this particular item. But at Greenwich High School, in the mechanical room, there was a water damage claim, and in the science wing, and we've recently approved money for that failure. But the replacement of the heat exchanger has been delayed. This is in our controller's report for tonight, has been delayed because the vendor that was contracted to install the equipment is no longer able to do so. And so therefore, the BOE is putting this out to bid. Is this something, as a follow-up to Andy's question, that, of this value, basically $250,000 that should be put out to bid?
Again, Leslie, that's a good question. I'll touch base with Chuck. For 13 years, I've worked with the town purchasing department either to put something out to bid or to do it quickly. And I've worked with Chuck in the past. I'll touch base with Chuck and see if we're going to do it as an emergency basis or if we could fast track going out to bid. I have a fairly good relationship with Chuck and his team, and if we can fast track it, that may be the way to go.
That would be, it's a savings for
It could
the
be.
town. Thank you.
Ms. Pasliotis.
Here's what I'm having difficulty reconciling. You said you knew from day one that it was a problem once you installed it. And now here we are in 2019, 2 installations or 3 installations of new boilers later. Why wasn't this addressed sooner by management when you knew that there was a problem from day one?
It was. I can't tell you how many times I fought with the engineering team at Project Renew for this and other aspects of the facility. For lack of better words, I'm not the engineering team, they didn't listen, and they stayed with their team to try and find out what the problems were or are.
Not questioning I'm just questioning why the board didn't bring this up sooner, since they knew that you were having catastrophic failure after catastrophic failure.
The board's assessment, based on what they knew was going on, is that we could limp along until the 2020 capital budget year. And one of the things that we try to do in concert with our own board is, ration the money in a responsible way. We have a 15-year capital plan that extends all the way out, till 2027, I believe it is. And it was the board's feeling that based on our experience so far with the boiler system, that we could wait until this year, this coming year. Now, the practical fact of the matter is that what we're here to do is to ask you to move up our capital expenditure by 3.5 months. We were planning to spend this money in next year's capital budget come July 1, 2019. 2019 for the fiscal 2020 year. We missed by 3.5 months. Shame on us. You whip and abuse us for that, but we did the best we could in trying to determine when this money would be necessary. We thought it was going to be next year. Right now, we're risking, a catastrophic situation if we wait, and so we're here a few months early asking for you to release the money sooner.
Ms. Vasiliotis?
Just as a follow-up, I understand, that you are now in a dire situation. I guess I just question why we are in this situation when you knew from 2014 that this was a problem. I just am having a little difficulty reconciling that. Now, this was also going to be an additional appropriation, so it's an interim appropriation, correct? I mean, we're not putting it into the capital that we would normally put it into. So now you're, asking the taxpayers to take $255,000 out of our, our funds when we could have rolled this into capital going forward. So I'm just a little disturbed by.
There'll be a reconciliation between the 2 years. I know the subcommittee addressed that matter last week. I don't recall if you were in the room or not, but I think to everybody's satisfaction, the way that's being handled financially is acceptable.
Okay. Are there any further questions or discussion on this item? Alan, and to your staff and contractors, I'd like to thank you actually for bringing this to our attention. You're taking care of some of the frailest people in town, as we know, and it would actually be a worse catastrophe if you had to evacuate your residents due to a failure of the boiler system. So while we don't like how we got here necessarily, and there are tasks for you to follow up on, which we hope that you'll communicate, thank you for raising it in a
Thanks for
timely
having
manner.
us.
So all in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. 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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have Ms. Vasiliotis, Ms. Tarkington. Did I miss anyone? That item has carried 10-02. That concludes our budget items, and now we move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the assessor's report. We're joined this evening by Ms. Elliott, Town Assessor.
Good evening, Madam Chair and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for February 2019, and also like to apologize for missing January meeting. Sorry about that.
I hope you're feeling better.
Yes, I'm feeling much better, thanks. First thing is that the grand list was signed on January 25th. We sent out notices by the January 25th. We sent out 2,585 real estate notices, and those were where the assessments were changed. We sent out 4,095 change notices to personal property accounts, and that we send a notice to every single account, regardless of whether it changed or not. Currently, the Board of Assessment Appeals are taking in appeals. Taxpayers have until February 20th in which to file the appeal, which is tomorrow. Currently, as of today, we have a total of 116 appeals. There are 93 residential, 10 commercial, and 13 personal property appeals. We should still probably get a fair amount tomorrow. Just as a point of reference, on the 2017 grand list, we had 224 appeals to the Board of Assessment Appeals, and in 2016, we had 2,008. Okay. One comment I have, and I apologize for this, on your last page of my report, we chopped off the headers on the graphs. So on the first column, that should be the date. The second column should be the number of valid sales. The third column is our standard deviation. The fourth column is the median ratio, and the last column is the average ratio. And if you look at the bottom graph, basically what that shows, and this is the crux of the matter here, is that our sales are still higher than most assessments. Okay? Anybody have any questions about that? Doesn't anybody have any other questions for me this evening?
If there are no questions for Ms. Elliott, can I have a motion to accept the assessor's report?
So move.
Okay, the assessor's report has been moved by Ms. Tarkington and seconded by Mr. Raymer. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Mr. Mason.
I'd like to make a motion that we move to the item under new business senior tax credit ordinance as our next item.
Okay.
I'll second that.
There's a motion by Mr. Mason. I don't like surprises. To move an item out of order on our agenda, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All in favor, please. Mr. Mason, is there a rationale for your motion?
I just look at I know we have guests on a couple items, but I just trying to, we have guests from RTM and the commission. I'd rather just get them, give them time instead of keeping them here all night.
Okay. All in favor of reordering the agenda, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Let's see, I missed on this side. And, well, I'll do this way. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. So that item has carried, which brings us to the item under new business, the third bullet, senior property tax relief proposal. Okay. Can I have a member move this item? Ms. Crumick?
I'd like to move that we take up the senior property tax relief proposal, and we're going to amend it before we vote on it. Sorry, we're just trying to make sure we do this in the right order.
Okay, so this, the item before us, the document in our package was version 6, and so that was moved by Ms. Crumick and seconded by Ms. Moriarty. Ms. Crumick, can you please present the report of the Law Committee?
Yes, we had members of the Commission on Aging, Lori Contadino and Kip Bergweger were there to present the senior property tax relief ordinance. What I'd like to do is walk through the process. They presented to us the ordinance which had been approved by the Board of Selectmen. They explained to us that they were that what they wanted to do and what they'd asked the Board of Selectmen to do was to extend this ordinance from not only seniors who met the qualifications for tax relief. Excuse me? Okay. That they wanted to expand that to those residents who are totally disabled and also qualify for the tax relief. And so the document that the Law Committee was presented with already had the changes to the ordinance that would include the references to totally disabled residents. Having presented that to us, we then were asked by the assistant town attorney, Mr. McLaughlin, to add a provision, and it sits in the first numbered paragraph in the third line, where we proposed, and it was amended in the Law Committee, and as a result, it reads now, after the Law Committee voted on it, as to add the words after his or her principal residence, we would add the clause, or held in trust for the benefit of and occupied by such resident as his or her principal residence. So we expanded it to the in trust concept, but we also wanted to ensure that that a resident occupied the residence in order to be eligible for this tax relief. So those were changes to the first paragraph. The second paragraph, let me wait and come back to that, because there were changes that have now been made under when it was reviewed by the Budget Committee.
The disability, did you go through the adding people with disability? Oh, okay.
I'm not going to read out all the references to disability. They were highlighted, and they're there in the text. We had some discussion about the actual computation of the amount of the property tax credit, and the numbers that are going to be in the chart that should attach to the final ordinance have been altered by the Commission on Aging as they've reevaluated the benchmarking, starting at less than 24,000 and taking it up I think now it's at 68,000, if I'm correct. The Law Committee also accepted the change that had been presented to the Board of Selectmen, which was to add a notice to taxpayers. And the thought was that it was important for all of our residents to know that this was an ordinance that they could submit an application and seek tax relief, and that this would be done at the same time that bills for tax payment were being submitted to the residents. So there is a provision under number 18 that was in fact voted on by the Board of Selectmen, and for which we concurred that that made sense. So we, the Law Committee, voted on that and as an ordinance, and it then went to the Budget Committee. And I guess the question is, Leslie Moriarty, do you think possibly you could pick it up from there?
So this item was also taken up by the Budget Committee, and I want to thank the members of the Commission on Aging for coming to our meeting as well and to present the ordinance. At the Budget Committee, we voted on 3 motions to change. The first motion was to revise the chart that appears on page 5. That chart references $2,009, and the assessor worked to upgrade, to recalculate the amounts and to update that chart. So now we start at less than 27,000 going up to 68,000. And so the new chart is in, I think everybody has a copy of the version 7 to see those numbers. Along with that, the date references that appear in several locations in the document are all updated from 2009 to 2019 or 2010 to 2020. Basically, it's a date on page 5 in 11A, in number 1, changed to 2019, in number 2, 2010, changed to 2020. On page 6, under B, tax deferral, July 2010 was changed to 2020. On page 7, under 11C, 2011 was changed to 2020. And on the last page, in number 17, the 2010 in both February and July references were changed to 2020. So that was motion number 1, and that passed 4-0-0 at the Budget Committee. The second motion affected on page 1 was to increase the residency requirement from 1 year to 5 years. That appears on number 1 under number 2. So a residence needs to be a Greenwich resident for 5 years to qualify for the program. The rationale at the Budget Committee was that the goal of the program is for Greenwich seniors to stay in their homes, and that would give a higher minimum standard for what a Greenwich resident is. The vote at the Budget Committee was 4-0-0. And then the third item is for the term of the regulation that was on the last page, section 19, for the expiration. As it came to the Budget Committee, it was for a 10-year ordinance. And while we understand that it does take a lot of work to bring changes to this ordinance and to do the background work to all of the bodies that act on this, there may be a good reason to review the terms of this more frequently, to update the numbers, to see if there are any other classes of residents that we may want to capture. And while it can always be changed and a new ordinance can be promoted, having an expiration date of 5 years does guarantee that we will review this every 5 years. So the Budget Committee agreed to that change, and we voted 4-0-0 to make that change.
Thank you, Ms. Cormick and Ms. Moriarty. Those are very detailed committee reports. So we have a motion on the table for an older version of the proposal. Is one of you going to move the amendments that you just talked about?
We've got some questions.
There's actually one change that we need to make to a couple of the date sequences
Okay.
that Lauren picked up.
Okay, so let us first, I guess we're not going to take an amendment to an amendment. So, Ms. Elliott, can you please?
Correct.
Okay, so sorry about this. I just got this today. So it's not anything material. Well, what it is on page 5, we start there. We updated the qualifying income is the current income for this year for the grand list of 2018. Where it says number 2, for fiscal years commencing July 1st, 2020, that should really say July 1st, 2019. 2019. So in other words, if I'm adjusting these qualifying income and the property tax credit, which I'm required to do every year, I need to do it starting when we start with this. So you need to make 3 changes here. One on page 5 in section 2. You need to make another one on page 6 under tax deferral, the Roman number 1. That needs to be July 1st, 2019 as well. And then on page 7 in paragraph C, third down.
Respectfully,
Yeah.
I think paragraph number 1, which has the grid with all the numbers,
Right.
is the, you turn that off? Is the grid that applies to the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2019. Paragraph 2 then gives you the inputs to update that for each of the subsequent years afterward, and thus reads correctly at 2020, doesn't it?
No, because the grid here, the qualifying income, is not the 2019 grand list, it's the 2018. It's what I'm working off of right now. So for next year, in order for me to increase these parameters, you need to change the dates where it asks
the
me to
next
increase.
year.
Yeah. In other words, I don't know what the CPI is next year. I can't determine any of this stuff until next year. So my cap at $68,000 is the cap for the grand list of 2018.
Should it not reference, its reference is now fiscal year, should we reference grand list? That's
If
the
you want
confusing
to,
factor.
if you would like to, that would be fine. Either way, doesn't matter to me. But what needs to happen is next year for the 2019 grand list, I need to take that $68,000 and adjust it.
No, it needs to stay fiscal year. I mean, the grand list year is October 1st.
Right, so fiscal year is just
October
fine.
1st
Can you
preceding.
please address questions through the chair?
I don't know, through the chair, if I may.
Yes, if you could just let me know when you're planning on speaking out.
I'll tell you
Mr.
what, I won't-
Raymer?
I won't speak out. I'll leave you deal with it.
Do you have a comment to make?
Only that it would be an error to change fiscal year to read grand list. The grand list works from a different year. It works from October 1st of the year preceding. It reads correctly if it's left reading fiscal year.
Okay. Ms. Elliott, are there any other?
Nope, those, if you just make that slight change, what that allows me to do is take these numbers these are the current numbers, and adjust them next year for the 2019 grand list, like I normally would have.
So Under, while I'm looking at this then with the dates. So under tax deferral, paragraph B1 on page 6, the amount of tax deferral here in a fiscal year commencing on July 1, 2019, and thereafter, the persons with a qualifying total annual income of $60,000?
That was not changed, so,
Okay.
okay.
Ms. Oberlander, can we just clarify that the assessor is willing to leave in the word fiscal years under 2 on page 5? So it'll read for fiscal years commencing July 1, 2019.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's
follow.
fine.
Okay. Ms. Tarkington?
I think Jeff is correct. Lauren, haven't we, I'm sorry, may I ask Lauren a question through you?
Sure, sure.
Lauren, aren't you right now have a notice out for applicants for the period July 1st, 2019 for that tax year? And I think they're applying now for that year, and you upgraded this for the information that you put.
This is the information here is for the it's for this year, which is for the July bill. However, this refers to the income levels for the fiscal year. So in other words, in order for me to increase these, the way it's written now is that I would keep the parameters going from 27,000 to 68,000 for the next grand list year, or the next fiscal year, when I shouldn't. I should be increasing it because these 68,000 is the current year now. Next year, that's going to actually be for the next grand list year. I know you don't want to talk grand lists, but that's the problem here.
Well, for the next, may I still ask another question?
Yes.
So for the next grand list year,
Which is
That would be-
2019.
October 1st to 19.
Right.
And that would then commence with the increase in the
It would,
fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020. So you will have to increase it then, but I think the one for 2019, I thought this was already adjusted.
it's not. If you look in my assessor's package, I can't figure, I don't know how to adjust it yet because the consumer price index and whatever hasn't come out. The parameters here are what I'm giving up to $68,000 on your local senior credit right now. If you look in in the packet I sent you,
Right.
the highest income level is $68,000. That's for, if I need to, usually every year I increase it. So if you keep it as written, that means I'm not increasing the $68,000 next year.
You still have questions?
I'm not comfortable with this response yet. Again, things were moved, as I understand it, I'm looking straight at Lori.
Yeah.
Basically, this has been carried forth, so we've already renewed it twice previously on the same basis, and this would vary the time. Jeff, I see Jeff still looking at this.
So the last time you increased it, you didn't change, you left the qualifying annual income what was actually written in 2009. When the last time we redid this, we did not update this chart. Since we've updated this chart, I'm updating it with the current grand list, the 2018 numbers. If you had left the old chart and left that in place, I would have just taken the old values and taken the CPI as I do every year and just increase it accordingly. Because we're taking this chart shows the $68,000, which is what I'm granting to the elderly people, senior people this year. Currently, if no, if you look in your assessor's package, you'll see my elderly, the senior. Look to it's the first or second.
If these are the correct figures for you, based upon
Currently.
the billing as it's going to go out in the coming July,
Mhm.
July 2019,
Mhm.
these are the figures. Then when you get over to page 7, You take these figures and you adjust them based upon CPI at that time. You don't need to know the CPI for this year. You've got the figures. They're the ones in your grid on page 5.
Right, I understand, yeah.
And I believe that you're incorrect when you want to change the 2020 in paragraphs 2 and others to read 2020. I believe it correctly reads 2020. That will be the adjustment to be made to the tax bills a year from this July, or the tax bills that are covered by a year from this July.
If that's how you, well, okay. The way I read this simply is that in order, this is my base, this is now becoming my base year. And you're asking me to use this.
Base year is the billing.
Can you let her,
Yeah.
please let her finish, and please let me know when you're planning on responding.
That's okay. The way I look at this and the way I got, is that this is my base year. And my base year is the 2000, it's what I'm granting this year right now on the grant list of 2018. I need to be able to adjust these figures next year. I can't use these same figures. And I don't believe when I say for fiscal years commencing July 2020, that this allows me to do that. I think if it says commencing July 2019, it then allows me to, it then allows me to adjust it. That's the way I read this.
So,
Mr. Turner.
Madam Chairman, I've been sitting on this end of the table being very quiet. I make a couple of observations. One is this is a very, very serious matter before the BET. We have 11,000 people in town that live at or below the poverty line. Given the difficulty that we're having with this, and noting that we're not under any time pressure to take a vote on this evening, I'm going to move that we table this, giving the appropriate people the ample time to get the correct version and wording in front of the body, that we table this until the March meeting of the BET. I would like to use the expression of tabling it to the March BET meeting. Well, I don't want to debate it. Okay, we'll say postpone.
Okay.
So motion to postpone the vote until the March BET meeting.
So we have a motion on the table to postpone this item until the March BET meeting, made by Mr. Turner, seconded by Mr. Raymer. The March BET meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 25th. And I just want to find the March RTM meeting.
The 11th. March 11th.
March 11th.
That's not going to work.
The RTM is scheduled to take this up, I believe it's Mr. Bergweger, right? We were planning on putting this on the call for the March RTM.
I don't have the date clearly in my mind, but we were trying to get this to it has to be on the call, I think, in the next few days in order to make the next item, the March RTM meeting, and actually, I think maybe the April.
When is, yeah, so you're,
I don't have the dates in front of me, so I'm not exactly sure, but the concern is that this will expire in June. We will not be considered in May because that's the budget. And if we make the April meeting and then there's debate in the RTM, we'll still have another month to finalize it, whereas if we're in June and there's debate, this will expire. So that's why we wanted to get this done as soon as we could so we could get on the call.
so you can submit for the April call, if we take it up if the BET takes it up in March.
It's too late.
No, you would have the vote for the April RTM meetings, although maybe not the final text of
Well, what I don't know
the ordinance.
is if the BET moves and approves this, I don't know if you can go onto the call even though it's past the date at which items are.
No, you could put it on what I'm suggesting is that you put the item on the call and that if there's a language change at the BET at the March meeting, you may need to provide a substitute ordinance. Mr. Weisbrod. Okay.
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Turner.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to my colleague. I think it would be a very dangerous precedent that we vote on a document that we haven't seen a final version on, particularly noting the difficulty that we've had here tonight. I just don't think that would be a good idea. I understand the somewhat sense of urgency, but my sense is if it's still on the RTM call for April, that's still enough time to move that through the process, include it in the final budget for both the BET and the RTM. I think it would be the wisest move for us would be to postpone this until our next meeting.
Ms. Hess. Yeah. No. We also have a special meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, so we're all in attendance. I can schedule a second special meeting to take it up if people don't want to wait until assuming that Mr. Turner's motion passes. That's another option as well. Mr. Mason.
I would like to say I agree with Mr. Turner's concerns as far as we've been working on this. Before I vote to postpone this till our next month, am I understanding that the only issue we have is agreeing on what the base year is for this 5-year, I'm hoping it's 5 or 10, whatever we decide there, what the base year is for the numbers? Am I understanding it is that simple?
Is that a question to
I'm
me?
asking the chair of the question. You can have whoever we want answer it.
Well, I'm going to ask Mr. Raymer and Ms. Tarkington to respond to what the concern is. I think it's what they want to read the provision. My guess would be, but I'll let them respond, that they want to read the ordinance as proposed with all of the language and try to understand the flow of adjustments. Mr. Raymer.
I mean, if you take a look on page 5 at 11A paragraph 1, it lists out the credits. And those are the credits to be applied to the taxes which are due with the bills that go out in late June for July 1st. To my understanding, you then make an adjustment in paragraph 2 to pick up what effectively is the change in the valuation on our grand list by a percentage amount. The calculation is laid out there, and that's to be an adjustment. And it says right on its face, the amount of the tax credit. The tax credit are the figures which appeared in paragraph 1. And those figures are now to be adjusted for the subsequent year. And because it's the subsequent year, that's why it should be reading 2020. But that's the issue. We have to figure out exactly what the language is to see if the language reads correctly. Respectfully, I honestly seldom disagree with our very accomplished and capable tax assessor, but I honestly think that she may be misreading it, but I honestly think it's a simple technical point to carefully read the language, decide that issue, and it could be dealt with, as the chair has suggested, at our special meeting on the 22nd, as long as it's properly noticed.
Ms. Tarkington, and then Ms. Cromick.
Yeah, I've been looking at this, and, I think it's very confusing, but I went back to the page that was prepared and the amount of the credit. And quite frankly, I thought I agreed with Lauren, but I'm really, to be honest, I'm waffling. But just in case we vote on this and it ends up being deferred, I would like to make one comment that's not directly related. Is it possible for me to make that comment?
Well, right now, we're debating the motion to postpone.
I know, but if we postpone it, then I won't have the opportunity to make the point. And the only point I'd like to make is, I would like to express our appreciation to Kip Bergwegger, who today prepared this document for us, because the one in our package was version 5 and version 6. And I wanted to make sure that we all show our appreciation to Kip for taking his time this afternoon to making these marked changes for us. And I just wanted to do that in case this got postponed, so.
Thank you, Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Crumick?
At the, at the risk of making this more complicated, well, looking at the changes that were proposed in the Budget Committee, it seems to me that if under A1, it should have read July 1, 2019, and then you've got all your new figures from 27,000 to 68,000. When you move down to the second, the numbered sentence, for fiscal years commencing July 1, 2020, if you're following the sequence from what was there originally, it was 2009. And then they're saying 2010. So if it's 2019, it should have been moved to 2020, not to 2019. If you jump down to B1, it was 2010, so it was 1 year after the year that was in 1, and should have been, from my calculation, should have been 2020. And there's one other, under C on page 7, where it was jumped from 2009 to 2011, and therefore it should have been 2021. Do,
Through the,
So
through the chair, that was a mistake.
Okay. Okay.
if we stuck with that, I think we could vote on it tonight.
Okay, and there was a comment by Ms. Moriarty that I'll let you respond.
Right, item 7C, as it was debated in the Budget Committee, we determined that the 2011 was probably an incorrect year, and it should have been 2010. Therefore, adding the 10 years brings it up to 2020.
Thank you. Ms. Vasiliotis?
sorry.
It's on, okay. I was just going to echo what Beth said, that if you look at the original document and you track the changes, it makes sense the way it was currently written without going through the amendments. I would also just like to ask through the chair why on paragraph B, while we're there, on page 6, why the $60,000 was not changed to the $68,000 by the Budget Committee.
Ms. Moriarty?
In response, since we didn't have the chart in the document, we did not pick that up, but it should read 68,000, and the $3,000 number, I believe, needs to change as well. Is that?
Madam Chairman?
Okay. It seems that we would all benefit from another more careful read of this ordinance, and so we have before us on the floor a motion to postpone to a subsequent BET meeting made by Mr. Turner, seconded by Mr. Raymer. I'd like, Mr. Weisbrod? I have not yet decided at which point we will, whether we'll have a second special meeting on the 26th, which is next Tuesday. And it's been suggested that I assign somebody to take the lead on sorting out the dates and the drafting. And I'm tempted, I don't know how busy Ms. Vasiliotis is these days. You can decline and I'll ask someone else, but I know you're an excellent drafts person, so I can refer to the Law Committee entirely and to Ms. Vasiliotis for her excellent draftsmanship. I'm hoping that the rest of the meeting is going smoother. I would like to point out that we had Ms. Tarkington agreeing with Mr. Raymer and Ms. Fasliotis echoing Ms. Crumick. So I think so far I'm working on a banner night. Mr. Mason, are you going to second what I just said?
I was just going to thank Mr. Turner to change it, postponing it from our March meeting to our special meeting on the 26th. I just wanted to thank him for changing his motion.
I'd be delighted to do that, you reverse engineered my motion at the discretion of the chair.
Okay. Okay, so we now have a motion to add an agenda item to our special meeting on the 26th, or to call it a second special meeting at the same time so that we don't confuse the issues. That motion is now on the floor. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion has carried. I'd like to thank Ms. Contadino, Mr. Bergweger, anyone else you have here that I can't see behind, Ms. Elliott, for your hard work on this, and we will do our best to take it up again so that it can go on the RTM call. I believe that the deadline was March 15th for the April call. So, thank you, and thank you to the Law Committee. Okay, which brings us back, I believe, unless Mr. Mason has any other amendments to the rest of our agenda, and we were on the Controller's Report. Mr. Marnarski.
Good evening, Madam Chair, BET members. You all have a copy of the Controller's Report. I will answer any questions at this point.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Marnarski on the?
I have one. On your report, Peter, you have Hamilton Avenue Elementary School water damage claim?
Yes, January 31st. It was very cold.
And you also say that you haven't received anything from the Board of Ed yet.
Not me,
I'm sorry,
the risk
Megan.
manager. There's a couple open items on the four different claims as far as updated information for the insurance claims.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
I just don't recall seeing that one in the media. That issue, that I don't remember seeing that. So we now have four claims.
The BET was notified of that claim by email, I believe, during one of the Budget Committee meetings.
But my point is, I mean, it's now raised to, it could be something that they cleaned up on their own, but this seems to now looks like it's going to cross the threshold to be an insurance claim, and yet we're not getting the information from the Board of Ed. That's my concern.
Okay. Was there a specific question, Mr. Mason, or just a comment to Mr. Marnarski?
I could follow up in the morning with Megan, the risk manager, and did you not all get that email with the pictures?
Right, but that doesn't.
I'll get an update.
That it would meet the threshold for an insurance claim, or, that we're getting the communication from the Board of Ed on this stuff.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Marnarski on the Controller's Report? Hearing none, can I have a motion to accept the Controller's Report?
I move that we accept the report.
Okay, moved by Ms. Tarkenton, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. We have the Treasurer's Report showing investing portfolio activity for the month of January 2019. Peter, I actually had a question on that when I was looking at the Treasurer's Report.
Yes.
I was just looking at the January numbers, and maybe I didn't notice it on prior Treasurer's Report. Thank you. In front of me. The numbers on the bottom don't net to. Can you just explain the way the report is presented with the numbers on the bottom, and whether it doesn't net out the additions and the subtractions, correct? Withdrawals, excuse me. Under the total, the line on total for the January.
Are you starting from 206,763 going to the right?
I have 196,007,311 on,
Oh,
sorry, I'm on the wrong page, yes, so, sorry, yes, in the January 206.
these are two different reports. One is a monthly report, one
Yes.
is a 7-month report.
Right, but the numbers, when you add them up in terms of the additions and the withdrawals, so you should, on the top, you have the general fund, you have the 184. Maybe you can just explain the totaling on that and on the year-to-date.
Okay. Are we you're on the page that starts with 118 million for the general fund?
Yes.
Okay. That's the starting point. You add the 184, subtract the 142. So that would be about 42, brings you up to about 160. And then you add the transfers and then the appreciation. You're saying they don't foot from
No,
left to right?
I'm just wondering, so when you add the 142 withdrawals, is any of that being substituted into a different account?
No, these are net numbers. These are all the activity for in this case, this is a monthly report. The one underneath it is an annual report. So that's the activity. For example, the bulk of the additions would be the maturity of the bands, which would be the withdrawals, the paying out, and the paying off the bands. And then the additions would be the rollover of the bands, new bands, and the bonds. And basically, the only ins and outs would be the transfers, the 507,000, the 988.
Okay.
And then the appreciation is for the month for that. The underlying page is the appreciation for the whole year, the 1,422,000. I will double check all the numbers, but I think your question is footing from left to right.
It's the rollover of the bands is the additional additions.
The bands are both in and out. There's a maturity and a
Right.
new issuance.
Right, okay.
So said another way, these are intra-month movements, the additions and withdrawals, and then you have to look from the beginning balance of the general fund of 118 to the end of the month to see the month to month.
In this case, yes. You just added
Yep.
them? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So that was my question on the treasurer's report. Anyone have other questions on? Thank you. Okay, so I note that we have received the report, which brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is the ET Standing Committee reports. We have a report from the Investment Advisory Committee. Mr. Weisbrod.
As this committee knows, the Investment Advisory Committee has been working with the town treasurer to facilitate the ability for the town to invest general funds in U.S. government debt instruments. And in that context, the town has been engaged in a negotiation with J.P. Morgan, which is coming to fruition. One of the elements of the contract, however, that J.P. Morgan presented did not provide for excess SIPC coverage, which had been a requirement which is a requirement in our cash resolution. And so the Investment Advisory Committee discussed that matter, determined that the benefit of the excess SIPC coverage was not material. What it does is it provides for a little more than $1 million in insurance for cash, as well as $1 billion in insurance in aggregate for the entity that's holding the assets under custody. Insofar as J.P. Morgan holds trillions of dollars under custody, as does Bank of New York, which is our other custodian, the incremental $1 billion coverage for the entirety of the holdings of those entities was not something that would be significant, since it wouldn't, of course, accrue to us. Of course, J.P. Morgan is required to segregate its assets, its securities, under the SEC Rule 501C, and we were confident that they were meeting those requirements. Hence, the Investment Advisory Committee, in the context of facilitating the conclusion of the contract with J.P. Morgan, voted to delete the 4 words, provide excess SIPC insurance. This requires a vote at the BET.
Thank you, Mr. Weisbrod, and I note that we have that amended resolution on our agenda later on. I'll call on you to make that motion at that time.
Thank you.
We have no BET liaison reports this evening. We do have a report from the BET Special Project Team on the debt and fund balance policy.
Madam Chair, I would request that I defer that report to take it up under the items of new business when we discuss the fund balance policy and the debt policy.
Okay, thank you, and we'll come back to you on that. We have no old business to discuss, but we do have a couple of items of new business. The first item on the agenda is the acceptance of the June 30th, 2018 annual report. Mr. Minarski, we had a question came up in our prior conversations about this. Can you describe for the BET what's been done in the past with the annual report, whether the BET as a whole has to accept it or whether it is just accepted on behalf of the BET by the chair?
We actually checked on that, and over the last series of years, we've done it both ways in the transitions. Let me start at the very beginning, and I'd like to commend Elaine. Elaine starts the process about 6 or 7 months ago, and it's a hard process because she's got to go through all the different departments and send emails and follow-up emails, and it's a charter requirement, a state statute requirement to get these compilations, and we can put it together. Traditionally, the process is that it goes to the Democrat and the Republican that I report to, which are traditionally the chair, and in this case, it would be the Republican, and in prior years, the Republican and the Democrat. They would review it, and we looked through, and it's gone, to answer your question, I explained the process, but it's been accepted by the full BET.
Okay.
Which is probably more proper.
Okay. And is there a timetable in which the BET has to accept it by?
If there are questions, you could defer it till next month.
Okay. So I note that the draft annual report was not included in the package that was provided to the BET members, and it is a lengthy report. Some members have indicated that they would like to take a look at it before they're asked to accept it. So I'm going to suggest that we defer this item to the March meeting as well. And if I could ask you to ask Elaine, first to thank her for all of her hard work, and then ask her if she could forward a copy of the draft annual report to the other BET members.
If I can, does anybody prefer hard copies we can make available this week at the budget meetings? Okay, I'll make them available. And by the way, can I take the opportunity? I left out in the controller's report, one of Jeff Raymer's favorite reports just became available, the municipal fiscal indicators, which are even with the RTM members. So I've ordered 25 copies, and it's very, very interesting. There's information in there that's, if you want to benchmark against other towns, I encourage you to read this and really go into it. For example, is part of my my revenue and fixed charges presentation. I took the liberty to look to see who has the largest grand list in the state, and I'll let you wait till Friday or the book to see who's number 2, 3, and 4. They're all in Lower Fairfield County.
Okay, Mr. Mason.
On the annual report, if you go back, not last year, but the year before, it was 11-0 for the 15-16 annual report. So we did that in early 17 at our January meeting. We had one member absent. It was only 11 votes, but voted to approve the annual report. That was what we did 2 years ago, or exactly 2 years ago.
Okay. Okay. So hearing no objection, I will put this item on the agenda, I guess, as an item of old business for the March BET meeting, which brings us now to the cash management resolution. Mr. Weisbrod.
thank our Chair, Leslie Moriarty, for the work that she's done.
Wait, wrong item.
Oh, cash management. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she did a great job here, too. So I move that we make the amendment to the cash management resolution.
Okay, so this item, the amendment, which is the deletion of the language in bold in the package, item Romanet 2, provide excess SIBC insurance, has been moved by Mr. Weisbrod and seconded by Mr. Raymer. I'd like to open it up for discussion. Any questions? Okay. Mr. Deuce.
Committee.
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Okay, we already covered senior property tax relief, which brings us then to the fund balance policy, first read. Ms. Moriarty, can you please give the report of the committee?
Can I make a comment? That
No.
I was,
No.
I
Not
cannot-
yet. First, I want to acknowledge the hard work on the Debt and Fund Balance Policy Committee by my colleagues, Mr. Deuce, Mr. Drake, Mr. Weisbrod. We worked very hard and over many months to address both the fund balance policy and the debt policy, and I thought we worked well together. And I do want to acknowledge the report that everyone just got last night, which I know didn't give you a lot of time to review. I also want to acknowledge, because of the late time when it was completed, I did not share it with my colleagues on the committee for their comments, so they may want to make some comments after I do. But it was only for lack of time and not for lack of desire for your additional input. Fund balance policy, just so you know, that the debt and fund balance policy team, we met 10 times starting in October, the last meeting being just 1 week ago in February to complete our work. On the fund balance policy, the team voted 4-0-0 to recommend a rewritten fund balance policy that does not make any substantive changes. The background on that, as written in the report, the level of fund balance in our town has been increasing. In fiscal 15, it was $35 million, or 8.8% of the operating budget, and it's grown to $55 million, or 13% of the operating budget. Our current fund balance level target is 5 to 10% of the budget. The reason the fund balance has grown over the past, that was 3 years, is due to several reasons: conservative budgeting, unexpected revenue, healthcare expense savings, and not very many interim appropriations for unexpected capital needs. We did spend one of our meetings talking with the town's financial consultant for debt issuance, who gave us some context of what other municipalities are doing, and how Greenwich, any change in our criteria, how that would be viewed by the credit rating agencies on our fiscal balance sheet. And he relayed that other municipalities have been increasing their fund balance ranges. However, those municipalities are more dependent on state revenues for balancing their budget. They have lower grand list and higher mill rates, so they have less flexibility to raise additional revenue if needed. He did not believe that Greenwich needed to increase our target range to remain attractive and to maintain our AAA rating. The discussion at the committee level, we really centered around what level of fund balance is prudent. In the past, the town had some serious concerns about some of the fiscal issues that might come to us in a very fast manner, one being exposure to the state fiscal policies like the teacher pension fund, our cost of environmental remediation if it was very high in a very short period of time, and the higher self-insured retention. And while each of those risks was discussed, our consensus was that the town would have time to be able to respond to any one or more of those risks if they were to occur. Given that, we felt that the current target range was reasonable, and we wanted to maintain the 5 to 10% of our operating expenses. The other item we discussed is, since we are above that at the moment, is what would the town do to address the fact that we do carry higher cash reserves than we think we may need. And the concern might be that if we wanted to take action in one fiscal year to just lower fund balance and potentially lower a mill rate, that could be very jarring to our residents. And so we acknowledge that if we did want to make a change, we need to be cognizant of that, and it might take several budget cycles to accomplish. I do want to note that we've had more interim appropriations this year, and so some of that excess fund balance has already been committed. The committee did take time to rewrite the current fund balance policy to improve clarity, and in your packets under Attachment 1, you have both the proposed fund balance policy that was approved 4-0 by the committee, as well as the existing one, which was approved by the BET in September of 2017.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. I wonder whether it is a first read, the fund balance policy and the debt policy, and since members only received copies of this late last night, I think it's worthy for people to take some time to digest both the report as well as the recommended modifications to the policy. What I was wondering was whether we get the report on the debt policy and then open it up to the other members of the committee for their comments, as opposed to splitting it. You want to split it? Okay, so I'd like to thank, on behalf of the BET, the hard work of all 4 members. 10 meetings over a short period of time is quite a big commitment, and I do appreciate your dedication. I also want to thank the members of the public, the RTM. We have Mr. Sensi here tonight, who attended many of those meetings, if not all of them, and other members of the RTM attended many of the meetings as well, and I think it was a good, productive, and collaborative conversation, and I thank the members of the BET for allowing and encouraging that kind of dialogue. Mr. Weisbrod, I know you had wanted to make comments. Do you still want to make comments on the fund balance policy, or are you waiting for the debt policy?
That our chair in particular, in light of the other commitments she has vis-a-vis budget, the countless hours that she spent with the rest of the committee, particularly regarding the modeling work that was done. We all worked hard on putting together a model. I think it's very constructive work and will be helpful as it guides us as we go in any direction, whatever that direction may be. I think we would all agree, I hope, that work has been superb. And Mr. Geiger for his contribution as well in that effort. I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that.
Yes, thank you, Roland, for all of your hard work on both policies, and Peter as well. Mr. Drake or Mr. Deuce, do you want to add anything on the fund balance policy? No? Yes? Okay. Okay. Are there other, this is a first read, are there other BET members who would like to add comments now on the fund balance policy? Okay, no? So I'm going to ask Ms. Moriarty to give the report of the committee on the debt policy then. Yep. Yes.
So the project team, after we completed our work on fund balance policy, moved to consideration of the debt policy. In your packets on attachment 2, you have a copy of both the current debt policy and a revised debt policy that incorporates the changes that were approved by the committee 4-0. We spent considerable time considering the following information for the debt policy: our current criteria evaluating our level of debt, the capital plan presented in the fiscal 20 budget submissions, both the towns as well as the Board of Ed's proposed master plan. The Board of Ed's proposed master plan is a significant increase over what they submitted last year. It's almost 600% increase over last year. We also spent a great deal of time, as Mr. Weisbrod reference to our debt model. The debt model appears in our budget package each year, and although the criteria are not calculated on that particular model, I think that the BET does take a look at what the current level of the debt on the criteria is, as well as looking what it happens over the capital plan. We spent a great deal of time creating an extension of that debt model, which allows for changing assumptions more readily, for being able to change both the term of our debt, the level of capital, the capital tax levy, which are the three factors really that go into determining what the town's financing structure is for capital plans. And that modeling took a great deal of time, but also I think has yielded really good results and will be a good planning tool for the BET and the finance department going forward. We talked about our current financing strategy as well as alternative approaches. And we did, in our meeting with our financial consultant, talked about different financial strategies as they impact the town's AAA debt rating and what other municipalities are doing when they consider going out to the bond markets. The two motions that were approved, one was just some non-substantive language changes to improve the clarity, and then we added one sentence that we all agreed to, which was to add flexibility to the bond sequence. Right now it's limited to going in that manner, and the sentence that was added will allow the comptroller to recommend earlier implementation of the long-term debt financing if circumstances so warrant. There were three other motions that were made at the committee level that were not approved. All three of those failed on a 2-2 vote. One was to modify the third affordability target, which is net debt as a percentage of the grand list, going from 0.55% to 0.75%. The second modification was to add a sentence about the structure of our debt, and the sentence being, going forward, debt maturities shall consider the 15-year capital forecast and debt model and evaluate the use of longer-term maturities up to 20 years to address major infrastructure investments and remediation projects. And then third motion was the adoption of report and debt on the debt policy offered by Mr. Deuce and Mr. Drake, which basically said to delay changes to the debt policy. And they can clarify their comments further, but all three motions are included in the packet. The proponents' justification for making those proposals are included in that for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. I'm actually reminded that in order to have even a conversation on this after the report, we should get a motion to put the committee recommended policies on the table. So if I can ask you to make that motion.
Mike says they don't need to be, they come from a committee, but to make a motion, make a motion to adopt the the committee-approved debt policy.
Okay, so I now have a motion which may or may not be needed on the table. Do any of the other committee members want to add their comments to the chair's report? Mr. Deuce.
Is what, Leslie? Okay,
No, I was,
thank you.
just to start the discussion, it was suggested before the meeting that I needed a motion, and I neglected before on the fund balance policy, so I'm correcting myself on the debt policy, which may or may not be necessary, but now, belt and suspenders, it's all done.
I think the report and the two policies as amended by the committee are before us. They come on behalf of the committee.
Okay. Any comment by the other committee members? Mr. Weisbrod? No? Okay. Okay. Mr. Deuce?
We will be taking this up at the next meeting, I presume, where we have a chance to, after having read the comments, to discuss this in a more fulsome manner. So I don't really plan to add any comments tonight, if that's okay.
No obligation to add comments, just if you, I don't want to encourage full discourse. We will be taking this up at the March meeting. Seeing no other interest in making a comment at this time, I'm going to move on to the chair's report. The chair's report is chock full of additional meetings. So if you've all received the notice and the invitation to attend the opening ceremony for the new Lebanon School this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. Next Tuesday, we have a special meeting called a joint meeting with the Board of Education to receive the presentation from Blum Shapiro. They are doing the operational assessment on the Board of Education policy and practices. That meeting is called for 5 o'clock. And assuming that the Law Committee has completed its work, we will most likely have another second special meeting to immediately precede that meeting. If timing works, I will canvass everyone after the meeting for a 4:30 meeting, subject to the completion of the work by the Law Committee. I also wanted to just remind members that March 18th, which is the Monday, we will be joined in Greenwich by the consultants hired by the BET to do the operational assessment of the Nathaniel Witherall HDG, and that meeting will also be inviting the Board of Nathaniel Witherall to join us to hear the executive summary and recommendations of those consultants. And lastly, looking ahead, first, thank you for the time you're spending reviewing the budget and attending budget meetings. Once we review our budget and recommend a budget to the RTM, it will be our turn to educate the RTM members, and I will be reaching out to each of you about attending RTM meetings during the months of April and May, as I did last year. So you can look forward to that as well. Now, Mike, can I pass the microphone over to you?
This is not something I'm really looking forward. As everybody's probably seen, there's been some forwarding about one of our past members, Catherine Gomard. She's been in sounds like a horrific car accident coming down I think it was the Parkway.
Merritt Parkway, yeah.
And she's in serious condition. It was a multi-vehicle accident. I heard her vehicle got hit from the rear, pushed into another vehicle. I heard it was a mess. I don't have anything I know the Sentinel's got an article on it. The Greenwich Time has an article on it. If you hear anything, please, let us know. Catherine was a very instrumental BET member. Moved out of town, came back. She comes to our BET members. She was in the old days of the different BET when I was on the RTM, and I worked with her she always got District 8, and it was always, I was chair of the district, and it was always a lot of fun, but I just wish her the best. It's horrible to hear it. It's just horrible to hear, that happened to her. It's sad.
On behalf of the BET, we wish her speedy recovery and well, and just in our thoughts. So, which brings us to the approval of the BET meeting minutes. You've all received draft minutes from the January regular meeting of the BET. Are there any proposed changes to the minutes?
So move the minutes. Oh, no, okay.
Madam Chairman, I have one typo on page 3. The word contact was shown as contract, so we'll make that change. Otherwise, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes for the regular meeting held on January 22nd, 2019.
Now second that.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington, subject to correction of a clerical error. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes have been approved, 12-0-0.
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
Mr. Deuce, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Vasiliotis, second. Thank you very much. 8:23.
Sure.
Finish writing your notes.
So what'd you uncover?
It's very clear to me how this is supposed to go.
Good, because
Yeah, well, I mean, No, 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 just listen. Just listen. Just